Energy is inherently a part of everything we do in our lives, but one of the least understood things.
I can see a future where there is limitless and free energy. And that's a pretty beautiful world to live in.
All right, welcome back to Power to the People. John, this week we're diving into all different types of energy. So what I find really interesting is we've discussed a lot about fossil fuels, we've discussed a lot about solar, battery storage, incentives, like a lot of stuff, but I don't think we've painted the picture fully of like what energy actually looks like. And want to look at it from like what's available right now, because we've touched on the fact that like for the last 100 years, like fossil fuels has kind of been the way because, well, that was the best technology it had to offer, but that we're at this turning point. But I think a lot of people don't know what the turning point actually is and what options are actually on the table. So wanted to kind of open it up and just start by talking all different types of energy, forms of energy, how we use the energy, and which one we think is best.
Excellent. Yeah, I'm super excited about this because we're gonna go deep. We're gonna build out the conceptual framework for what energy is and how we utilize it, and then really dive into like these are the options that are available for us right now. You know, not 50 years ago, not 50 years in the future, but right at this moment. So yeah, what I want to do is also be sure to look at the entire life cycle of different forms of energy technologies. So, you know, we're not just looking at one little slice of, you know, like from resource extraction to final use to, you know, waste disposal, et cetera. So looking at the whole picture. So
Where do you want to start? Yeah, which one do we want to tackle first? Because there are quite a few different ones. So where do you want to go first?
Well, first I'm going to just set up a little bit about what is energy, because just to make sure that everyone is on the same playing field, on the same footing. So you may remember from, you know, your high school, college physics classes, energy is this mysterious thing that makes things happen. There's not really a super solid definition for what energy is, but at the end of the day, it's the thing that makes the universe alive, you know, makes it have motion, makes it have reactions. Otherwise, it would just be, you know, matter floating around in darkness with no movement, no nothing. And all forms of energy are, at the end of the day, rooted in the four fundamental forces of nature. So you can dig those out of your memory too: electromagnetism, gravity, and the weak and strong nuclear forces. So unlike matter, energy can neither be created nor destroyed. So that means it's always either in two kind of fundamental states. It's either in flux, so it's being transferred or transmitted, or it's in storage. It's kind of contained, like it's, you know, in a battery or, you know, locked up in molecular bonds. So it's not moving that way. It's not actively making things happen, but it's ready. It's available, you know?
And if I remember correctly, that is known as potential energy. If I go back to
yes,
like high school science, it was like potential energy versus, real and kinetic energy.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. So when we're looking at it from a human perspective, and especially trying to look at it from like, how can we tap into, you know, different energy sources? You kind of break it down into three really big groups. So there's chemical energy, which is provided to you by the electromagnetic force. So this is energy that is basically stored in chemical bonds in molecules, that is released through a chemical reaction. So mostly what we like to do, because it's easiest, is combustion. So good example of this, you know, oil. You can get oil out of the ground. You can, you know, process it, refine it, you know, turn it into different fuels, and then combust it in a internal combustion engine. And from that, you can derive locomotive force, that we use to power our cars. But this can also include things like like food. Food is like
Mm-hmm.
way to store chemical energy. So the plants that grow on the earth that ultimately provide our food, essentially all of it, comes from photosynthesis from the sun that is stored in chemical bonds, and that energy is what drives basically all life on Earth, with very few exceptions. But they are out there anyway. So. Yeah, other examples include other fossil fuels like natural gas and coal, as well as just kind of general chemicals like ethanol, ammonia, hydrogen, and biofuels produced from animal and plant fats. So if you've ever driven behind an old, like VW or something that smells like French fries, it's burning, it's burning biodiesel.
Only in Santa Cruz too.
Well,
Well, I mean, a lot of different places, but I remember like growing up in Santa Cruz that, there were a few cars that would drive around and pick up all the used oil from whatever the cooking oil from whatever local restaurant and fuel their car after it. And I was probably like 5 or 6. I thought it was the coolest thing ever because I was like, wait,
yeah.
we all go to this pump and we put it in, but then this guy's taking like used oil from restaurant. Not only does it smell better, but what? It works. And it just kind of opened my mind to this idea of different types of fuel to get to the
Right.
same result.
Yeah, there's so many energy flows out there, that so the big thing to remember about chemical energy is that it needs an input of energy to create the energy that's stored in the bond. And then that bond gets broken, and then we use that for something else. So it all takes some type of energy coming in, whether that's, like the sun, which mostly, like the vast majority, even of fossil fuels, ultimately their power came from the sun, not from dinosaurs, like some people like to,
Yeah.
jokingly suggest, oh, I'm burning dinosaur bones. It's actually you're burning like ocean slime from like a billion years ago. But anyway, from the sun takes an input, creates the bond, and then we can extract that energy afterwards. Next main big bucket of energy is atomic or nuclear energy, which was brought to you by the weak nuclear force. So in that, I mean, I think people are generally pretty familiar, but basically energy is released when you combine or split apart the nuclei of atoms. So like a really common one that we use a lot is uranium fission. So that's like taking a big old unstable atom of uranium and extracting the energy that comes out when that splits apart into two smaller atoms. And then we take that very like high intensity energetic process, that seems very futuristic, and then we use it to boil water to drive a steam turbine. So yeah, that's one example. And then there's uranium fission, thorium fission, which is not really something that is used a lot, although China is starting to kind of investigate that. And then, of course, fusion energy, most notably hydrogen fusion in stars, which powers everything else basically that we're talking about here today. And then
fusion being the hard one to achieve too. Like I know that in the
one that's
discussion
always
of
30
energy,
years away.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Because it does have, I mean, I think in some ways it has the potential for sure, but also a lot of the discussion centered around how much energy it takes to then get to fusion. And like, is
Right.
that, fight worth the benefit at the end of the day? I know that's kind of the fusion fission conversation. A lot of people just dump nuclear into one thing, but it's actually got a lot of this involved, like the fission, the fusion. Then thorium, I appreciate you mentioned, just because thorium's coming up a little bit more. But yeah, very not used in terms of energy, and I think it's got some potential, but it's one of those subtle ones I think that people should look into a little bit more.
Yeah, it's not a like a silver bullet for nuclear. It was kind of passed over in previous generations, particularly like the Nixon administration, like kind of had like a big choice, like we either go uranium or we go thorium, and they went uranium for various reasons, higher output, more nuclear waste that can be turned into nuclear weapons.
Mhm.
Yeah, but
We also probably
thorium
have
has
more uranium around too than thorium.
no, no. I actually think
Hmm.
it's the opposite.
Our stockpile wasn't. Oh, interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, and then thorium, it's a little bit safer. I mean, it's really complicated. We're not going
Yeah.
to dive into
No,
the specifics of of different
definitely not.
nuclear reactor technologies, but yeah, those are kind of the big buckets
Hmm.
for nuclear. And then so our last big category is what I kind of refer to, and this isn't like a technical term, but I like to think of it as process energy or renewable energy. So like basically we're tapping into an existing natural process that and then just extracting some of the energy from that. So good example is wind power. We're just tapping into this natural flow of energy. So it's driven by gravity and thermodynamics, and so it's not tied, like explicitly to one force. Um, but basically, yeah. So tapping into either solar radiance, like sunshine, solar panels,
Hmm.
or pressure differentials in air or water. So like wind happens because there's an area of high density air and an area of low density air, and they sort each other out. They
Hmm.
move together, and then we feel that as wind. Water can be up at a higher elevation flowing down to a lower elevation, or it can be, in the ocean where it's being pulled by gravity to create the tides, or it can come through currents, which can either be, heat or salinity or, what have you. So there's all different types of ways in which energy flows through the natural world that we can kind of tap into a little bit.
Hmm.
So fundamentally kind of different than the other two in that it's not like, oh, you need this fuel, you need this like, energy storage thing, whether that's an atomic nuclei or a chemical bond. It's like there's energy flying around all the time, and we're just kind of taking a little slice of that. So yeah, those are
I, f- I
those are kind of the
find
big
the wave
three.
one. I find like ocean and wave related power generation really fascinating right now. I know they're doing a lot of research on it of how to, like, there's a lot of wave machines that will basically use solar panel for the thing to kind of sit there and stay in one
Yeah.
place, and then it's just collecting basically the kinetic energy of the ocean. And to me, that's just like it's a passive way. Now, don't know how much energy that's actually producing, because I think that's a lot of this discussion too. Is like there's methods and then there's efficacy of those methods, and how much it can actually work at utility scale, house scale, personal scale, because that's the whole other piece of energy. It's not just the generation; it's how does it fit into society and what our needs are.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And we'll be talking a lot about that too.
Yeah.
Because yeah, like I said, there's so many ways, there's so many different natural, energy fluxes, flows out in the world that we can really kind of pick and choose like which ones suit us the best, which ones are the most useful for us.
Hmm.
So what I want to, now that we've kind of introduced all of them, I want to go through some of their different aspects, like both in kind of like general terms for the whole category, and then like dive in a little bit more specific to like specific energy technologies. So I want to talk about the life cycle efficiency. So like from start to finish, like how much energy can we get out versus like how much do we have to put in? That's a
Ah,
big
it's
one.
huge, huge,
That's
huge, huge, huge.
because we talked last time about the like the energy services versus rejected energy,
Hmm.
and like this is really getting to the heart of that, of like why are we wasting 2/3 of the energy that we generate?
Hmm.
It's because a lot of it is not as efficient as it could be.
Hmm.
And then the next thing I wanted to talk about is the accessibility of the different energy technologies, different energy sources, and then the environmental impacts and the social impacts. So, how do they affect the planet that we're on, that keeps us alive and healthy? And then how do they affect like human society? How do they affect us like as a species?
Nice,
Um,
love it.
yeah. So, do you have a question?
Yeah, I was actually curious on So when you're actually going through the energy production process, I think a lot of people think that like I, I tend to have a belief that like humans like to complicate things more than nature does in a lot of ways. Like I think there's a simplicity to the way nature converts energy, whether that be a plant photosynthesis into energy. I feel like there's complex processes, but the steps are simple. And I feel like some of our energy solutions, and I know we'll get into them, you have like 50 steps to get one thing. And to your point, energy is neither created nor destroyed. So we're losing stuff even in those little steps too.
Mhm.
And sometimes I think about, are we overcomplicating all of this? Like, can it just be more simple? And I think that's also a fresh mindset that I think can be used with renewables or processed energy, as you mentioned, which should coin that, by the way. You should. Um, but
It's like an engineering term for energy that's used to create like components, like manufacturing. Which, but I like mine. I like my
I
definition
like it.
better.
But I think that speaks to the simplicity. Because you mentioned like with the fossil fuel process and a lot of the other ones, like there's a lot of steps, a lot of energy that goes in to then create the thing. Whereas this other thing, it's already existing and we're just kind of grabbing it. So I just
Yeah,
wanted to point that out of like, I think simplicity in this is a really important mindset to kind of keep throughout as we discuss a lot of these things.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. And just generally, the fewer parts you have to a technology, especially the fewer moving parts, the more robust it is, the longer it lasts, the more efficient it is. Because all of those moving parts, like an internal combustion engine, we talked about it last time, the roar, the rumble, like all of
Hmm.
that is just wasted energy.
Hmm.
um, unless you're using it for like, social dynamic purposes.
Hmm.
So anyway, diving into the to the life cycle efficiency side of things. So let's start off again. Let's go in the same order. So chemical energy first. As I mentioned, it requires an initial source of energy to create that energy bearing bond. And yeah, basically all of it comes from the sun. There's some other processes like chemosynthesis, like ocean vents deep underwater. But for our purposes, it's basically everything's coming from the sun, whether that's things that are made right now through like photosynthesis from plants that are, have lived and died recently, or from plants that died millions of years ago, and, became fossilized and turned into oil and coal and natural gas.
Hmm.
Um, so to focus in a little bit more on fossil fuels, because that's primarily, how we have generated energy, the majority of the energy that we have like generated and utilized like as a species has come from fossil fuels over the last like 150 years. So um, looking at where efficiency is lost, it's lost at like every step of the way. So resource extraction, takes energy to dig out the coal, to pump out the oil, to vent out the natural gas. It takes energy to refine that, to process it into something that is it's more useful for us, because the way it comes out of the ground is just it's a mix, it's a hodgepodge of different chemicals. It wasn't made for us to use. Just it just exists. And then we need to transport it, potentially across the world,
Hmm.
in big tankers where, you know, they can have accidents like Exxon Valdez. And then we need to store it. And so it takes energy to, pump it into a storage thing and then pump it out of there. And then we need to use it. So, and that use is by and large combustion, which is a very inefficient way to harness energy from something. Um, there are some what we call them fuel cells. It's basically a non-combustion way to harness chemical energy. It's basically going in and having your energy-bearing molecules, hit a membrane or a surface that breaks the bond, releases some electrons that flow to the other side. So it's kind of like a chemical battery in a
Hmm.
way. Those are much more like specialized in use. Um, they're starting to become kind of more popular because of green hydrogen, which is another form of chemical energy that you can produce using process or renewable energy. But yeah, those fuel cells, they require, it's another input of resources, materials, of time, effort, and also they tend to be made of or they tend to have components that are made of like gold, platinum, like expensive, high value metals. So you get a higher efficiency, but at a higher cost. So there's kind of this trade off compared to
Yeah.
combustion.
And a quick question, asking for a friend. So when you see all these cars driving around with fuel cell,
hmm
is that what we're talking about here, or is that just kind of
Yeah.
a branded term, just for people to kind of recognize what fuel cell is in real life when they see it? Because I think that also helps. Is like, that's what that is.
Yes. Yeah. So any like the Toyota Mirai,
Mm-hmm.
I think it is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I believe that that's a fuel cell. I don't think that's hydrogen combustion. So with hydrogen, you can either run it through a fuel cell or you can combust it. But yeah, I think there's been more emphasis on the fuel cell side of things. So yeah, those, like if you see I mean, very rare unless you're like in very
Fair.
specific parts of California where they have like the public hydrogen chargers.
Yes.
You're probably not going to see it, but they are out there. They do
Yeah.
exist.
Cool.
Okay, next up, nuclear energy. So there's a ton of energy that can be like theoretically, extracted from nuclear reactions. But as I mentioned, we kind of take this this atomic age technology and then use it to boil water and
Mm-hmm.
to drive a turbine. So we're kind of using a relatively inefficient way to convert nuclear energy into electrical energy. Um, and some nuclear power plants do use like the heat energy that is primarily what is produced. Um, but uh, the big efficiency losses happen during resource extraction. So we
Mm-hmm.
need to, like fossil fuels, we need to dig them out of the ground,
Mm-hmm.
and that has a long and torrid social history behind it, and environmental history. So resource extraction, plant construction, because these
Mm-hmm.
plants historically have been really big, super expensive. Takes a long time to build them because things have
Mm-hmm.
to be safe. They have to be,
Mm-hmm.
reliable. And then the really big one is waste neutralization and or disposal. So
Mm-hmm.
with nuclear waste, it's can have basically be radioactive at a toxic or just subtoxic level for hundreds of thousands to millions of years, which is not great.
Yeah.
It's like when you're looking at produce basically putting something deadly out in the environment for longer than humans have even existed. Like it's like, well, do we have the right to do that? I mean, we can kind of do whatever we want. There's nobody here like looking out for us, with a big hammer. But like, should we do that? I don't know. It's a whole ethical question. So you can also, instead of just like dumping it on, the ground, you can try to neutralize some of it. But
Mm-hmm.
that really cuts into your overall efficiency because you have to spend a lot
Mm-hmm.
of energy to neutralize the fuel or the spent fuel. So
Well, and we may have them on the podcast here in a little bit, but there is a company kind of working on recycling that nuclear waste and learning a lot about that. I mean, I didn't know that when they pull them out of the reactor, it still has 96% of the fuel left. We only use 4% in a nuclear reactor currently. Now, if the small modular reactors are trying to be more efficient and stuff like that, but
mhm,
generally and historically, 96% is still left over, and we just keep them in these huge concrete casks.
yeah,
Um, yeah, we may have a follow-up episode with a company that's doing some really interesting things on that, but it speaks to like this bigger problem of like we've realized the potential of nuclear, but I also think at the same time there's so many things that we haven't gotten right along that process and
yeah,
even at the end of the day, as you mentioned, the construction, until those small modular reactors become really commercialized and easy, they're still centralized energy. Like you still have that same problem that we discussed on other episodes of like line loss, because you can produce the energy here, but you still got to transport it, and you're just going to lose energy along the way.
Yeah, and I'll touch a little bit more on this a little bit later, but also, so small SMRs, small modular reactors, just for our
Yeah.
audience, are they're a kind of an emerging form of nuclear technology. There's like two, I think, in the world that have been deployed so far, although there's many more kind of in development. But it's basically a much smaller version of a nuclear power plant. So instead of like 3 gigawatts or whatever from a traditional power plant, you would get like 300 megawatts. So like about 10 times less power, but you need less fuel. It could potentially be more efficient. Yeah, but
And it's in the size of like a file cabinet versus
right,
a huge,
a huge building with giant cooling towers and stuff like that. A la The Simpsons. But there is some potential societal impacts to just spreading a bunch of small nuclear power plants all over the place, because we have to be very careful about like regulating what goes in, how the fuel comes in, and then what happens to the waste. And it's harder to do that when it's decentralized.
Absolutely.
Okay, so next, accessibility. So again, starting with chemical energy, and we're not going to look at like a lot of the potential. So like, I mean, food, that's everybody needs food all the time. That's ubiquitous, and that is a form of chemical energy. So we're going to focus in again on fossil fuels, which are today quite widely available, thanks to intensive extraction efforts over the past 150-ish years. But that has maybe misled people to thinking that they are unlimited and available anywhere. But really, fossil fuels are fundamentally limited in quantity and in geographic location, which creates some problems. It creates like a lot of patchiness in where those resources are available, which in turn kind of incentivizes, companies, people who are interested in developing the industry. It incentivizes them to concentrate control over those resources into a small collection of state and corporate entities, which, you can argue whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, but it is a thing.
It's a thing. Well, and I also remember, I remember when I was first learning about just the oil and fossil fuel process. And I specifically remember learning that it was a finite resource. I was like, huh, so how long do we have? And
Right.
that's a debatable number, but either way, I think part of it is putting on the hat of like, are we thinking short term or long term here? And personally, I think we should probably look long term, because we only have a finite time on this planet, but it's the generations after and after and after and after that will there come a point where there isn't any available for that generation. And I remember I was probably like 8 or 10 and just had this thought of like, man, I mean, this is great right now, but we should probably like come up with some other ways to kind of make sure everything's still functioning properly when that inevitable day comes. And yes, they're getting efficient at it, but at the same time, it is still something that we will run out of, much like lithium, much like all other things that we are actually mining are finite resources. Sun is kind of there. I mean, billions of years, they say it might not, but
Yeah. Absolutely. It's and that the issue of peak oil, peak fossil fuels, whatever, that's not even getting into climate change, which that's a whole other ticking clock element. That's got a big bonk hammer attached to, to the timer. Okay. So, next up in accessibility, nuclear energy. This is probably the least accessible form of energy to the average person. It requires complex advanced technology, and if you're doing it right, extensive safety measures. for everything, throughout the whole life cycle: extraction, processing, use, and disposal and storage, which puts it out of reach of basically everyone, but kind of the most well-funded and sophisticated governments and corporations. And because the fuel and the waste are so dangerous to, humans and the planet and, everything, it tends to also have a bunch of additional governmental restrictions, on, to prevent things like nuclear proliferation, to ensure public health. You can't just go out and buy a, lump of uranium and build your own nuclear power plant. That's against the rules. It's too dangerous. So it's not, low accessibility. Although corporations can, invest in these giant nuclear power plants, take years, decades to build, and then, sell the power, with all of those, to sell the power to the public with all of those, costs kind of baked in.
Well, and the safety side of it has been interesting just because I think if you want to count the safety of like all the different forms of energy, I think nuclear is the one that's most uncertain for a lot of people because you can't see it, you can't smell it, you can't, it's like, you have the things that happen, like the few incidents that have happened in nuclear, but if you have something that is going wrong, you can't tell necessarily when that's happening. And I think that like slight uncertainty for people is slightly unsettling, which is probably why it's not as accessible.
Yeah, absolutely. And for people interested in that subject, I highly recommend the film Silkwood, all one word, which is about a former nuclear power plant worker, Karen Silkwood, and what she went through. The movie itself, it doesn't quite get into all of the dirty reasons behind what happened, but it does kind of give you a sense of what it was like for people for Karen and for people in her community to experience nuclear pollution, and have it be very kind of like, they told us it was safe, like, and now it's everywhere. And like, we're, anyway, check it out. Silkwood, good movie. Okay. And then last step for, accessibility are renewables, process energy. And so the fuel is basically available anywhere the sun shines, anywhere the wind blows, anywhere water flows, anywhere the earth is warm. So basically anywhere on earth. You just need the technology to tap into that. And that has become more and more accessible, available, and affordable for, now you can go down to Costco and pick up a solar panel, to like just, slap on your house. Like it's that kind of, you can't go down to Costco and get a small modular nuclear reactor. You can't go there and get like, you can get I guess you can get a generator, like a diesel generator.
Yeah.
But but I mean, at least, renewables have gotten to that point where, they're right there in the store shelves next to technologies that have been around for, 100 plus years. So I personally would rank, renewables as kind of the most accessible. There's, you can go to Costco, but you can also, talk to people like us and, just write us an email, call us on the phone, and, we can hook you up with solar panels and, all the renewable energy that you'll want. And that's not really something that you can say for the other big buckets of energy.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it is just the infrastructure build out of that. Like it is accessible to the point where you can go to Costco and get it, but that I think is like because it's what we'll call as newer energy, even though it's been around for quite a while, but in the general society, it's newer compared to the rest. We're just behind on like how much it's proliferated through society. So if you just think about that ease and that on-ramp, it's getting so much easier, but the adoption rate just has to catch up to what what the rest of the world is using when it comes to fossil fuels or nuclear or whatever that power load actually would be.
Yeah, definitely. So I'm gonna talk about the social and environmental impacts together, because they're very, very tied together. So for fossil fuels, it's it's hard to overstate the impact that they've had on our society and on our planet. They have allowed us to create the modern world, really. I mean,
Hmm.
connecting us all together as a planet for the first time in our history. Um, and their stability and their energy density, and they're fairly available. They've allowed us to take to the air. We couldn't do that
Hmm.
with horses or with burning wood. Like they just that the energy density did not allow us to take to the air. But fossil fuels did. We can also move loads across seas and lands that would have been unthinkable to previous generations.
Hmm.
And I mean, they've been a powerful force for good in a lot of ways for humanity. And I don't want to like just poo poo all over fossil fuels, even though I'm like pro renewable. That because we have to
Hmm.
acknowledge that they were the ones that were responsible for getting us where we are today, and we
Yeah.
can't just forget that and be like frick you fossil fuels. It's
Yeah.
so it's I think it's important to give respect where respect is due,
Yeah.
and that fossil fuels have earned a lot of that, but they also have a lot of problems,
Hmm.
and we've been as they've gotten us to where we are today, we've been finding out that our reliance on fossil fuels has to be limited. It cannot go on forever. So it's
Uh-huh.
a really lovely like civilization building kind of stage, but we have to get past it. Like
Hmm.
we just have we will there will be change whether we like it or not. We'll
Hmm.
either get to a change point where
We either
the
choose or we're
environment
forced
has
to.
right exactly like
Hmm.
we're just not at a we can't because of the changes in the climate. Societal structures which will change. Fossil fuels require a lot of processing and like heavy industry to produce, and it's not easy unless you have this like big global economy with like heavy manufacturing, and that's that always being around is not something we can take for granted as we move forward into unmitigated climate change.
Well, that's
So
to try and put on like my future hat sometimes of like, look, if we're going into the world of Star Wars eventually, where we're going between galaxies and all that kind of stuff, I don't think in any of those movies they're like, hey, 239 a gallon? Sweet, let's do it. Like it was a completely different type of fuel in that concept of like going beyond. Um, and I think if that's the inevitable reality of humanity, which that's of course a debated topic, but if it was, um, then it would be smart to start to move away from it as a fuel source anyway. Because if we
yeah,
want to go farther past that and innovate, all those futuristic movies where everything's white and beautiful and floating and chrome and all of those things, there's not a lot of fossil fuel involved in that process. They never really discuss it, but you can tell that it's not. Um,
yeah,
and I just think there's this excitement around the ability to kind of innovate differently. And that's the cool spot we're in. But yeah, the environmental societal impact, I mean, it has been massive, but at the same time, does have its downsides.
yeah. I mean, it's been massive, both good and bad. It's
Hmm.
so uh, conceptually, fossil fuels are they're a way for planet Earth to take very large amounts of carbon out of the active carbon cycle and store it, uh, underground in geologic storage for very, very long periods of time. Um, and we found them and we said, oh wow, this is great. Like limitless energy, kind of. Um, and we burn it and we put that carbon back into the active carbon cycle of the biosphere. This has two main consequences. Um, Planetary warming due to the greenhouse effect. The more carbon dioxide we put in the atmosphere, the more heat the atmosphere captures from the sun. And two, something that gets overlooked a lot is ocean acidification. So the more carbon dioxide there is in the atmosphere, the more carbonic acid dissolves into the ocean from the atmosphere, which decreases the pH, makes it more acidic, and which is really not good for everything in the ocean that has a shell, which is a lot, a lot of stuff in the ocean.
A lot.
Anything that relies on calcium carbonate. Yeah. So beyond those two kind of, mass extinction level events or effects, fossil fuels, are also toxic to humans and other living things when they're ingested or inhaled. They can be transported long distances whenever they get into water. When you burn them, they, produce air pollution and smog, which can cause chronic health impacts. And coal has radioactive ash, just as a little bonus. Um, and then, we do a lot of habitat destruction and kind of long-term pollution through the extraction of these resources. So, yeah, they have so because they have these negative impacts, just as a society, we have decided there are certain groups of people that we're more okay with taking the brunt of those burdens. Marginalized communities, whatever you want to call them. And then because they're patchy, they can drive conflicts within a country. Like people being like, "Hey, stop, fracking our water and polluting it and whatever." But also international conflicts, like, I mean, well, I won't go into that, but there's been some wars over oil and stuff, right?
Well, when you really think about resource management has always been something that, if you go back to just human biology, it's about survival. And so at a certain point, it's resource management. It was food when we didn't have enough food. It's water when there's not enough water. It's energy when there's not enough energy. Like there's always it's a resource game at the end of the day. And I think a lot of countries, companies, people, it's about kind of keeping those resources so that way, you feel safe and secure and whatever that may be. And I think that's what has enabled a lot of this type of conflict over this resource, is because it is so powerful and it does enable wealth and growth and innovation and all that kind of stuff, that it almost feels like gatekeeping at a certain point.
Yeah, and that's an excellent thing to keep in mind. When you're thinking about energy and energy technologies, is how do these interplay with human psychology? Because that's basically what you're talking about. It's like we have this innate scarcity response, and that can lead us to do things that are socially disadvantageous. You could say. So. Yeah, good thing to keep in mind as you're thinking about any type of energy is like how, like theoretically, you can use energy in this way and this way, but like practically, like if you're talking about humans and like what we actually do, like how would it be used? So, which takes us to nuclear energy. So unlike fossil fuels, which have a kind of constant low to medium level impact on, the environment and, health and stuff, nuclear power plants carry a very low probability of a very high impact event, which plays into our psychology in a totally different way than fossil fuels, right? It makes people like scared. And that's part of the reason why, there's been so little nuclear development, especially here in the United States, is that fear over, we're not all on the same page about like what it takes to have a safe nuclear power system. And that includes the waste disposal. And, as I mentioned earlier, the waste, you either cut into your energy profits by putting in more energy to neutralize the radioactivity, or you figure out how to store it for, 100 generations.
Which costs money.
Which costs unthinkable amounts of money, and we can't even guarantee that that's something like, are we just creating a huge problem for future generations? Like, what is the cost of that? Why are we not? So is that ethical? Is it ethical to like pass off this massive burden onto future generations just so we can produce some power at a probably more expensive cost than other forms of technology that we have right now? It's just, to me, that the math doesn't quite math. So that's not to say that there aren't, like specific use cases that are really good for nuclear. If you need something that like you're in a submarine, that needs to stay
Yeah.
underwater. Like nuclear is great for that because you don't
Mhm.
have another power source. Anything where you need kind of containment. You can't have like the sun. You can't have the wind. You can't be like bringing in like oil.
Mhm.
That's great for nuclear, but I do think it's necessarily kind of a more limited use case.
Mhm.
At least for now. We'll see in 50 years or 30 years or whatever. But
Mhm.
okay, and then last up, renewables. Fortunately, this is kind of the shortest list in terms of like negative impacts, because renewable energy in general doesn't rely on hazardous compounds or harnessing explosions. Um, Although, like, that's not to say that different renewable technologies don't have some type of impact on the environment. So I want to particularly call out large hydroelectric dams
Mhm.
as a non-sustainable but renewable energy source. So
Mhm.
technically, it's
It's
renewable
the flow of
because
water.
it's the flow of water
Yep.
to process energy. But dams of any kind have a really big impact on river environments, river flows, navigability for species and for people, and also just for like habitat composition. It
Mhm.
changes what's around the river, it changes what's in the river. And not only that, they begin to fill up with sediment as soon as you put them online. And so you have to, again, eat into your energy budget by doing regular dredging of the dam.
Mhm.
Beyond that, I mean, you know, there are people that complain about, wind turbines killing birds.
Yep. Birds and the coral
Compare
and
that to bird deaths
changing.
due to just coal, and you see that's a non-argument.
Mhm.
Um, and then like solar panels, if you have like really big installations that can kind of cover parts of the natural environment.
I've
Um, you
never
know,
understood that, by the way. Like, I just, like, not a
you
soapbox
want some
moment, but like,
shade?
I've never understood why we don't just put solar panels over every single parking lot ever. Just make it standard because one, getting into a hot car sucks.
Yep.
So a shaded car is great. Two, what else are we going to do with that area that we've already paved over anyway?
Yeah.
It's such an opportunity that I feel like we're not doing more of because it is endless amounts of parking lots because we're fascinated with cars in the United States. And it's just, it doesn't cover up the natural environment. Because I think a lot of the pushback on that concept is like, we're putting them on, open fields and then we're just killing everything underneath for power, which is an arguable side of like you're also destroying nature. You do that at scale, it's like now you're almost causing the same damage, whereas already existing parking lots that we, can't do anything about, we'll just cover them.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's so much opportunity to solarize the built environment.
Mm-hmm.
That we don't even there are particular social and economic pressures that drive, especially like electric power utilities to build these very large solar arrays out in the desert. But that is not the only way to do it, and that's not even necessarily the best way to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe not even the second best way to do it, because you
What I
need
find
you need
interesting
power
about it
lines.
though, we can actually pull. So what I find interesting though is that we can pull that lever. Like a lot of the other energy sources, you can't pull levers like that, where it's like, what if we just go put this over here versus over here?
Yeah.
I think that actually is a little bit of a difference compared to all the other different energy sources that we actually can pull different levers to find the best fit. It's not necessarily
Yes.
one way is the way to do it.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. There's so many opportunities for renewables slash process energy to be used in ways that are more decentralized and more democratic. Um, because the fuel is everywhere, as I as I mentioned.
Hmm.
It practically grows on trees. Um, and so yeah, there's as we've seen with solar panels, the accessibility, the affordability has made it so that your average homeowner can go solar, your average business owner can go solar, and start producing their own energy from the sun. That's a pretty big deal, um, and there are some really unique opportunities for like countries that haven't developed as fast as, say, the United States and, some other countries, to kind of leapfrog over some of the fossil fuel steps that we took to get to where we are in renewable technology development. So, you know, rural places in, like Africa and India have, this really cool opportunity to just go straight from like, horses, and manure to solar panels and wind turbines and, batteries. And like, that's, to me, that is super exciting. I'm really excited to see how that kind of develops over our lifetime. But one
It
thing,
went into perspective for me actually. I was chatting with a friend of mine, and they were putting in their whole business model was putting in energy systems in like really hard to reach places like Papua New Guinea.
yeah,
And it was like energy wasn't a thing there. But if they needed to go grab whatever they needed, whether because they might have a boat and that needs diesel fuel, well, it would be an 8-hour journey just to get the fuel for that one thing. And it was like, if you can give power to, and the diesel was not just for the boat, it was for like the whole place to be able to cook, to everything. If you could get rid of that, now you have 8 more hours to do whatever the society wants to do. And it releases that reliance upon like, I have to make this journey every day in order to survive. Back to that like conversation of resource management. And it was
yeah.
like that decentralizing the energy at that point. Yeah, you can plop an entire power station in like in the middle of nowhere and provide energy. Like that's huge.
Yeah, I mean, I was kind of joking when I said we can, practically grow it on trees now, but with a solar panel connected to an EV charger, I mean, you can literally kind of grow gasoline on trees and, sell it in your backyard or, in a parking lot or whatever. Like it's just a fundamentally different energy system than, okay, we're bringing in oil from the Middle East, we're refining it, in China and bringing it back to the United States, uh, and then we got to ship it around in these big pipelines, and people are protesting against it because they keep leaking, and then we'll burn it, and it's like we're changing the climate, we're acidifying the ocean, we're producing smog and air pollution, and like, or you can just have a solar panel and an EV charger.
Mm-hmm.
And
Then
you
back
just
to
kind of
that
do away.
simplicity, right?
Yeah,
All the
right.
steps to like this one.
Yeah. Yeah. So, there's a lot of potential for, more efficiency, for more public engagement, and, like more democratization of energy, less concentration of resources in the hands of a few, which is inherently less democratic.
Mm-hmm.
That's just kind of by definition.
Mm-hmm.
And so to wrap it up here, because I know we're a little long. Um, if we want to preserve and grow the society that we built in this modern era, we have basically no choice but to wean ourselves off of fossil fuels as much as we can, and sooner rather than later, because change will happen, either through runaway climate change or an intentional worldwide effort to transition to energy sources that don't cause carbon pollution.
Or just running out of resources. Either one.
Yeah. So that means our options are, process energy / renewables, non-fossil chemical energy, and or nuclear. So that's kind of what's left on the table if you take out fossil fuels. So if we want to, really prioritize energy sources that are fundamentally safe, low cost, reliable, and provide a ready opportunity to build a democratic system, it naturally kind of focuses your attention on renewables, supplemented with some non-fossil chemical energy. So like green hydrogen, green ammonia. You can power planes and ships off of that, and it all comes from the sun, from solar panels. With some special use cases for nuclear, where it just really wouldn't work any other way. But enough, limited enough that like the waste issue isn't so terrible. Where it doesn't. We're not relying on a tight energy efficiency budget. Where it really cuts in if we need to, process the waste more, store it, etc., things like that. So. Yeah, that's kind of a general overview of energy
That
as
was
a
a big
human
one.
being.
Honestly, for everybody listening, I think this does paint the picture though of like we went a lot more into the weeds on this one. Um, and this is like it's intentional because this is a really complex problem. It takes a lot of moving parts. There's a whole storied history to it, but also we have the opportunity to rewrite what it is going forward. But hopefully it kind of paints the picture where people have a little bit more of an understanding of like where these sources come from, how they work, all the positives and negatives, because not a single one of these is like all positives and no negatives. And I think that's one thing to be very clear with everybody is like there is no perfect silver bullet that fixes everything. Like nothing in the natural world has all positives and no negatives. Like there's always going to be that. It's what is the best for society going forward, what's best for the planet going forward, and what's best for really us to continue living the life that we're living and maybe push beyond that.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's the story of humanity and our evolution is largely the story of energy and how we use it. And
Hmm.
I don't foresee that changing in the near future.
Now, the original combustion of fire in a cave somewhere was pretty phenomenal discovery of energy.
Yeah, thanks,
So,
Prometheus.
yeah, right? So, John, on that note, thank you again for an awesome episode of Power to the People, and we'll be back in a few weeks.
All right, great. Thanks, Steve.
Energy is inherently a part of everything we do in our lives, but one of the least understood things.
I can see a future where there is limitless and free energy. And that's a pretty beautiful world to live in.